Is there anybody here who has never been to a literary reading? Okay, well, good. I applaud your courage. This will be typical except in two respects. It will be shorter than they usually are, and mainly, I'm not selling anything. Usually these affairs happen in bookstores, and they're sort of excuses to sell books. There's things to draw people in, so you sell books. But the real purpose is to sell books. Okay, so why am I doing this? By the way, Bud, somewhere you have some water. Oh, okay, great. This is the sort of thing I used to do. You know, writers do it in a career. And I always liked the reading part, and I never liked the selling part. As I'll explain later, fortunately, in the latter half of my career, I was able to get myself in a position where I didn't have to do much selling of books. Most people don't realize there are actually two ways to write. There's two approaches that writers take. You can write outside in, or you can write inside out. And most of what we call writing, and most people talk about writing, is writing that's outside in. It's also commercial writing, writing for consumers. And this means that a project starts outside oneself. It may start with a subject. If I'm going to write a history of Vineyard Place, that's a subject. I have to research it, write it, and that's outside in. If I'm going to write a detective novel, I'm writing for a pre-existing audience of people that love detective novels, and that's outside in. Commercial writing, consumer writing, and all writers do that. I did a lot of it because it paid the rent. The other kind of writing is inside out. Artistic writing, or what I prefer to call serious writing. And a writing project starts with a writer usually having some kind of personal obsession of some kind. Something's in the head that won't leave, and it has to be dealt with. It may be a personal experience, it may be a nightmare, it may be an observation one makes of somebody else's experience, but it's personal and it's inner. And from that, and it's the kind of stuff that might just end in a diary entry. People that write diaries do that. What the writer does is take the diary stuff as raw material to tell stories, to create fictional characters and fictional events shaped into a story that then deal with that whatever issue started this process in the first place. And whereas outside-in writing is always about an audience, and you measure success by how successfully you reach the audience, i.e. bestseller list. Inside out, the audience doesn't even enter the picture until the end. And then you reach the audience by a kind of leap of faith. You say, well, in my novel about my divorce, or about a guy getting divorced, based on my personal experience of a divorce, if I'm ruthlessly honest and tell everything I know and admit the things I don't know, and there'll be somebody out there who's experienced something similar who will be my audience. It's always a smaller audience, and the measure of success is not quantitative. It's not. J.D. Salinger, who wrote The Catcher in the Rye, put it best, I think. He said, a serious writer's only obligation is to aim for perfection according to his own standards. Okay? And that's inside out writing. And so virtually all of, with a couple of exceptions, most of what I'm reading will be inside out writing. There's a couple examples of outside. Now, great writers can do, these aren't mutually exclusive. You can do both at the same time. Okay, I'm going to start with a poetry book called A Majority of One. That term comes from Thoreau, perhaps you remember. And I want to start with this because it has a section in it of poems I wrote to sketch, our 15-year-old rat terrier that some of you have met. And so here's a poem about sketch. I'm going to read 3 of them. This is called The Order of the Universe. As I'm tossing and turning in the gray morning, unable to sleep, not ready to rise, it is Sketch who jumps on the bed and decides the day has begun. I get up without argument, let him out, and when he returns, I'm at one end of the couch reading the paper on my Kindle Fire. Sketch jumps up on the other end and goes back to sleep, which always makes me smile. This is our reveille for a new day. This is called Sketch Wins. Now and again, around 2 or 3 in the morning, Sketch rattles his collar to inform me he wants to go out. And when he comes back in, we both go back to bed. But sometimes, like this morning, he'll soon jump onto the bed and get in my face as if to say, sorry, made a mistake, have more to do. This is Sketch at his best, following his natural energy, a persistent teacher reminding me of the first law of existence. Nature wins. This is called When Sketch Sleeps. Watching our rat terrier curl up against the pillow on a chair in the bedroom, I am overwhelmed by a sense of stillness, silence, order. My species has made an art form of disrupting harmony. Sketch, happily oblivious, simply gets comfortable, closes his eyes, and brings me and the world the gift of tranquility. Next, save your applause, save your throwing things and stamping and hooting until the end.
No tomatoes, John?
No tomatoes, no tomatoes. Okay, this is a novel called Love at Ground Zero. It's a love story. It's Romeo and Juliet meets 9/11. And here's I'll read from the blurb on the back. Wes, a graduate student, rescues Hayam, a Muslim undergraduate, from the South Tower of the World Trade Center just before it collapses. When they later run into one another on the NYU campus, they start spending time together. They take long walks in the city. They fall in love. But family and friends oppose the relationship. This scene takes place early in their dating. Wes doesn't know a damn thing about Islam yet. Later he will learn things, but at this point he doesn't know a thing. And they are in Central Park, and he has taught her how to throw a frisbee. And they're throwing a frisbee back and forth. They're about 20 yards apart when Hayam's headscarf goes askew from the exertion of a throw. Seeing her hair, Wes loses concentration and drops the frisbee. When he retrieves it and looks back, Hayam has removed the headscarf entirely. She stands before him 20 yards away with dark hair falling past her shoulders. Carrying the frisbee, Wes slowly walks toward her. Hayam walks toward him. When they meet, they stop, standing close. Hayam's face is wet with perspiration. Without makeup, she has the face of a woman emerging from a shower. Wes says, "You have beautiful hair." "I know." "I don't know why you cover it up." "Because it's my decision who gets to see it." "I'm glad I got to." "So am I." Perhaps you are too cynical to remember a moment like this, but Wes can feel his heart pounding in his chest. "Can I touch it?" he asks. "If you like." Wes reaches out and gently touches her hair, letting his fingers rest lightly against the side of her head, just above an ear. Her hair is damp. Hayam closes her eyes. "I want to kiss you," he says. Without opening her eyes, Hayam turns her head, offering him her cheek. He leans forward and gently kisses it. No, he did not grab her breast. They did not suddenly collapse in a passionate embrace to make love on the grass. This is not a popular romance novel. This is not The Bridges of Madison County. This is not a Hollywood movie. This is the story of Wes and Hayam. Hayam opens her eyes and looks at him. I have never kissed a man before, she says. As she bends forward toward him, Wes expects a kiss on the lips, but at the last moment she swerves and her lips touch his cheek. Her kiss is as soft as the landing of an insect. I'm going to read from two plays, and the first play, Bud's going to help me. I'm going to read from my most successful play commercially, and from my most successful play critically. And interestingly enough, they were both written in the same summer of 1984. The commercial one, Christmas at the Juniper Tavern. It was successfully, I think, primarily because it was topical. It came out in the early 80s and was inspired by the Rajneesh situation in Central Oregon. In my story, we have Juniper, a mill town. The mill's closed, so the town's filled with unemployed workers. Outside the town, an ashram is being built, filled with the followers of Swami Cree. In the scene we're going to, relevant to the scene we're going to read, a young woman from Portland comes looking to where the ashram is, followed by her mother, who's trying to talk her out of it. And my character in this scene, Rex, an unemployed mill truck driver, always looking for a way to make a buck, get the bright idea that me and my buddy Frank could kidnap the girl, take her back to Portland, and the mother could give her to a deprogrammer. And at first the mother goes along with this. And then at the last minute she changes her mind. And the scene is when we get the news that the gig is off. What's important to know is that Frank is a generation older than me. He was, in fact, my dad's best friend. My dad got killed in Vietnam. We're set in the early 80s. So we're in a pickup truck, passing a bottle of whiskey, and we've just learned that we don't get the gig. And I have my place, you have your place? Mm-hmm. Okay. No guts, no imagination.
Lady has a right to change her mind.
$200 for a round trip to Portland.
I don't think a deprogrammer would have had much luck. This probably saves everyone a lot of trouble.
Oh, shit, Frank, I sure miss driving my truck, I'll tell you that.
I hear you, son.
I don't know if logging will ever be the same. Maybe Fred Ross had the right idea, just chuck the whole deal and start over.
Hard to say.
Sometimes I get so damn frustrated. I'm a working man, for Christ's sake. If I'm not working, I go crazy. I drink too damn much. I'm not big on patience, you know.
I hear you. Neither was your dad.
No, guess not.
In the old days, when your dad and I got laid off, the town wasn't safe. I was a little crazy back then myself.
You still do pretty good.
You should have seen me in the old days.
Did Dad raise more hell than I do?
I'd call it even. Like father, like son.
Oh, shit.
You want to head back?
I want to scream.
So scream.
Well, shit, Frank, where's it all end?
Your guess is as good as mine, son.
God damn it to hell anyway.
I hear you, buddy. I hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I came to poetry late in my career, after I'd retired from teaching. And it's not really correct to say I started writing poetry. What happened is one day I woke up and in my head was a short poem in its entirety. I have no idea how I got there. So, I mean, I guess you write it in your sleep somehow, but there it was. So I wrote it down. A few days later, the same thing happened. And I wrote that one down. Then I got some lines that were not finished, clearly not finished. It was like the beginning of a poem. And I wrote those down, and then through the week, or how many days it was, I finished the poem. And so that continued. The poems always started with something in my head when I woke up. I never just sat down to write a poem. I started putting these poems on my blog. I got an email from the publisher of Round Bend Press, a small independent literary press, and he liked the poems a lot and said, if you have enough for a book, I'll publish it. Well, I told him what was going on, and I didn't have enough for a book. And he said, well, if this keeps going, eventually you will have enough for a book. And that's what happened. And he published it. And better yet, I started a relationship with this small, independent, literary, non-commercial press, which is just what I needed late in my career to, to be able to unburden myself from the stress of trying to have people interested in what I was doing. I didn't care. I wanted to interest myself, not interest other people. And this became a book in my old age, and I'll read several poems from it. This is called American History in My Lifetime. So there was this young president, and he actually was going to change the power structure in the country, which of course threatened those who hold the power. They conspired to protect what they considered theirs and successfully assassinated the young president, who dared to think he could change the status quo. I mean, they killed the son of a bitch. They actually did. And the plan was so good, they even had a fall guy, and they killed him too, so he couldn't talk. And there was so much dirty laundry everywhere that an actual honest investigation was impossible without dire consequences, national security and all that. So they made a half-ass investigation they hoped would put the matter to rest forever. Unfortunately, a few loonies didn't buy the official results and investigated on their own. And they came up with unbelievable, frightening theories about what actually happened, which in fact was pretty close to what happened. And many people believed them, except for some reason, they didn't get pissed off enough to take out on the streets and demand full disclosure. Instead, they just shrugged and said, well, politicians lie and there's nothing to be done about it. So nothing had changed, even though many folks realized they'd been duped. They went shopping and forgot about it. And the original criminals who assassinated the young president in the first place, they retained power and now could relax because they learned a profound lesson. In the end, in America, shopping wins out. And if you let people shop, hell, they'll put up with anything. This is called romance. In line at Starbucks, she leans forward and kisses him, soft as her skin in the shower earlier, their glow still fresh with all things possible. Divorce, for example, when this moment gets forgotten. And there's the tragedy, not the divorce, but the forgetting. Let nothing negate the kiss at Starbucks. It matters, it counts, and without it, in a zero-sum universe, the balance of the world tips askew. You must hoard the good moments in memory despite everything. The body I look out of. The body I look out of is not the body you look into. What I see through two holes in my skull has not changed much over the decades. But what you see in the reverse angle is no longer a young folk singer on stage, curly hair, red beard, singing Woody Guthrie, or the graduate instructor turning students onto Norman Brown, or the regular at his bar stool, not quite boorish as he talks about his latest play in rehearsal, or the adventurous cook, proud of his paella and his scrapple, or the restless traveler in a red VW bug named Ruby, camping coast to coast. What you see in the reverse angle is an old man growing older. So how can you possibly know? It's a young man looking back at you. Okay, this is a novel, Sodom, Gomorrah, and Jones, published in 2012, my latest novel. Round Bend Press published it. And I've published over 30 books, and if I had to go to a remote island or prison or whatever and could only take one book that I've written, it would be this one. It would be this one. It's a strange combination of fiction and autobiography and stuff. You know, I told you about the poems appearing in my head, where the main character, they appear in the head of my main character, and lo and behold, they're the same poems that are published in the book. You know? and the best friend of the main character is a playwright, and lo and behold, he's written plays with the same title that I've written plays of with about the same thing, and you know, so this crazy mix-up of. Anyway, now the best introduction to this probably comes from a review at Amazon, where the woman kind of sets up the situation better than I could. Carlton Jones, or CJ, is a 75-year-old retired history professor with an ear for West Coast jazz and 50s-era folk music. He devours books about the failings of the modern world. He plays guitar in his friend Matt's folk group, the Old Fogies. He's writing a book called You Get the History You Deserve, Notes on the Failure of the American Dream. And most important, he's struggling to make sense of a world that no longer has meaning for him. And the book has a happy ending because, in the sense that he finds how to live in this world that upsets him so much. Now, one thing that makes this novel different in a way, well, really, is that most books have what I call a horizontal construction. You have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, they go by like a flow of a river. But it's not the only way books can be written or you can tell a story. This book has a vertical construction, which is to say, instead of chapters flowing by, little snippets, little small things are stacked one on top of the other. And the effect is rather like looking at a collage in painting, you know, little bits and pieces, and it takes some work to kind of put it together, you know. So readers who don't like to work and readers who don't like to think should stay away from novels like this. So, but you know, and why do you do this? Well, you do this, well, actually it's kind of interesting, because it's a very fast read. The parts are so short, you know, you can just tear through them. So the reading is increased, but the understanding comes more slowly. So you purposely do this. I mean, I don't want the reader to be swept away by the story. I want them to be forced to think about the story and about what is really happening. And so you kind of slow things down. And you tell this part, and then you tell this part over here, and then and you mix it all up. So I'm going to read you some of these small parts. And I'm going to start with one that shows CJ at his most agitated. He's outlived his wife. It's 3 years since, and his wife was his rock. His wife was the one when he would get all crazy. But he's a news junkie, but even though, you know, all he does is swear at the TV set. But he goes back the next day. He's probably a masochist, you know. And she was his rock and always brought him back. And, hey, remember when we were camping and saw the sunset? You know, it reminded him of the beautiful things in the world. But she's gone. And CJ's doctor is very worried about him. And she misreads his depression, which she calls depression, as being that not getting over the wife thing. As you'll see, it's something else. And he won't take medicine, he won't take pills for depression. She tries to get him to go to a shrink and keeps hounding him and hounding him. He finally does, just to get her off his back. And this is that meeting with the shrink, and it's called, interestingly enough, CJ and the Shrink. And I start several paragraphs down. Now this is 2.5 pages long, and it may be the longest, quote, chapter, unquote, in the book. He tried to explain the truth of his situation, CJ. Apparently his doctor had not comprehended this, or she wouldn't have set up this visit in the first place. There was considerable difference, CJ now explained to Dr. Peters, between personal depression about the loss of his wife and general depression about the world at large. Yes, of course he felt immense grief over the death of his life's companion. But he'd been depressed in an intellectual, non-clinical sort of way most of his life, because the world was the way it was. One didn't have to experience personal loss to feel sorrow. A close look at reality, at the world, at the daily news was quite enough. For a man of integrity in this world, for a man struggling to live life honestly, the challenge was to retain one's sanity. You can't fix what was bothering me when Helen was still alive, CJ told Dr. Peters. It's larger than all of us. You couldn't fix it then, and you can't fix it now. You can either ignore it, or fill your life with distractions from it, or accept the fact that we live in a culture based on lies and deceit and betrayal. But how do you deal with that? You know what I think? I think the smartest among us, the most sensitive among us, they can't accept it at all. That's why they're locked up in loony bins. Insanity may be the only true response to all this mess. We lock up our best people. We punish the truly sane people in the country, the ones who see through all the mess and they can't stand it. Dr. Peters tapped his pencil on a yellow pad. This mess, I take it this is the historian speaking now, the professor of history. I don't divide myself up that way, CJ said. Well, that's good. So all this mess bothers you personally as well as professionally. CJ took a deep breath. He didn't feel like the doctor was understanding him. Let me try another way. I spent my career in the university studying my government's policy of genocide against American Indians. I realize we don't call it that, but the facts speak for themselves. Anyone who studies the record will reach this conclusion. We wanted the Indians gone because they got in the way of our expansion at every level, physical, spiritual, political, religious. Oh, let's not get too theoretical here, said the doctor. It's not a theory, it's historic fact. I mean, let's keep this about your emotional life, not your intellectual life. They're related is the point. But should they be? You don't want to be a victim of your own ideas. CJ didn't answer. The culture was anti-intellectual, this was clear enough, but was the doctor defending it? Dr. Peters said, I interrupted your line of thought. Can you pick it up again? CJ cleared his throat and tried. Why was he so nervous? Take something else that hits close to home. The political assassination of President Kennedy. That's what it amounted to, a political coup d'etat. You really think so? The doctor seemed surprised. CJ said, there is no doubt there were front entry wounds. Every doctor who first saw the body said so before the body was doctored to hide them. For Christ's sake, a cop walking behind the car was splattered with brain matter. Many people saw smoke, smelled gunpowder at the grassy knoll. This isn't made up. This is what witnesses saw. Front entry wounds means more than one shooter, which means a conspiracy. CJ stopped. He realized he was shaking. That was a long time ago. What about all this is upsetting you today? The doctor asked. CJ bolted up. Well, why the hell aren't you upset? Why the hell isn't everyone upset? They overthrew your government, for God's sake. How can you live your life as if nothing had happened? There was a long pause. Maybe this is a good time to stop, said Dr. Peters. Is the same time next week convenient to you? CJ took a deep breath. There is no next time, Doc. I'm out of here. Danny Whitebird, 1969. There were several dozen Native American students enrolled at the University of Montana in 1969. Some of them decided to form an on-campus chapter of the recently organized American Indian movement, AIM. They needed a faculty advisor. This, Danny Whitebird explained, was why he had come to Professor Jones. Would you be our advisor? CJ thought he smelled alcohol on the student. I haven't had you as a student before, have I? He asked. He was sure he hadn't. Whitebird in his black cowboy boots, jeans and matching jacket, black hat with a long eagle's feather in the band, and with a long braid down his back was hard to miss. No, but I read your book. From Where the Sun Now Stands was published a couple of years ago by the University of Chicago Press. The story of the unsuccessful flight to Canada by Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce. Well, that puts you in a select minority, said CJ, smiling. Good book. Are you Nez Perce? Chief Whitebird was my great-grandfather. CJ was impressed. So tell me about this club. Chapter of AIM. Whitebird explained how a new movement, the American Indian Movement, had been founded in Minnesota last year and was spreading all across the country. CJ was aware of this. The Indian students wanted to form a chapter on campus, but the university wouldn't recognize them unless they had a faculty advisor. How many of you are there, CJ asked. 8. And what do you need advice about? Nothing, we just need your signature on this paper. He pulled out a folded form from his jacket. He handed it to CJ, who unfolded it and started reading. Are you going to read the whole thing? Whitebird asked. CJ said, I like to know what I'm signing. Sometimes it doesn't make any difference what you're signing. You think you're signing one thing and it ends up being something else. CJ looked up from the form. Whitebird said, as long as grass grows or water runs. You have a point, said CJ. He took out a pen and signed the form. He returned it. Katsuyaoyao, said Whitebird. Katsuyaoyao, said CJ. Whitebird left the office. CJ wondered what Katsuyaoyao meant. The Old Masters, 1963. Coming down the hallway, CJ ran into Henry, a fellow graduate student in English, whom CJ knew from folk music circles. Henry's face was damp and swollen. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters, said Henry, his voice shaking. Is something wrong? Henry said, how well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating, or opening a window, or just walking dully along. Well, Henry, what is it? It's Auden. Suddenly Henry embraced him. He said something that was muffled against CJ's shoulder. CJ pulled back. They shot JFK, said Henry. The president died before CJ was able to get home to Helen, and they cried together. As painful as it was, they couldn't stop watching television. Helen called her parents, CJ called his mother. They stayed up late. Apparently a lone nut had killed the president, who in a few days would be killed himself on live television. CJ watched the rerun in horror. First, all the terrible beatings of Negroes in the South, and now this? What was the world coming to? Over a decade would pass before CJ began formulating an answer to the question, one that was far more terrifying than anything that had occurred to him at the time. CJ's computer, 1986. One day, CJ unlocked his office door and entered to find a computer on his desk. There was no note, no instruction, just the gray box with a screen. He knew a computer was coming, but the sight of it still shocked him. And the typewriter was gone. That was the worst of it. He actually was expected to use the damn thing. Fortunately, he had nothing pressing to type, so he ignored it. And he ignored it for the rest of the week until Friday when he had a letter to get in the afternoon mail. He could take university stationery home and write it there, or he could figure out how to use this thing. He'd taken a required course of instruction, but that had been over a year ago. He couldn't remember a thing. Well, it couldn't be that hard. The keyboard had letters in the same order as on a typewriter. CJ took a deep breath and sat himself in front of the computer. You can do this, he told himself. But he couldn't. Half an hour later, he stood before the secretary in the government department office. Well, how do you like your computer? She asked right off. I'm not sure. Oh, you'll love it once you get used to it, I promise you. I hope you're right. There was a silence. The secretary said, is there something else? I need a favor. Of course. I need someone to show me how to turn it on. And finally, this is called the problem of evil. CJ has just shared with Matt, his best friend, a retired theater arts professor, retired playwright, CJ's recent theory in old age that we live in a zero-sum universe. Whenever something good happens on the planet, something bad has to happen somewhere else to compensate for it, and vice versa. Complete bullshit, said Matt. They shared a table at Starbucks. CJ said, well, how else can you explain why so much bad stuff happens? I mean, what kind of God puts up with evil? To me, a zero-sum universe makes more sense. CJ, did you ever see a wolf bring down a cow on TV? Or even a cat playing with a mouse, which sure looks like torture to me. It's damn bloody out there, buddy. You ever hear of red in tooth and claw? It's just the way it is. You don't see any animals shedding tears about it. That's wholly a human deal. We're the ones who created so-called evil. Yeah, but why did we? I mean, what is it the anthropologist asks? What is this evolutionary advantage? I'm not an anthropologist, said Matt. I just know nature's violent and we're the only species that cries about it. Maybe that's not true, said CJ. Maybe other species do cry about it. Oh, come on. And even if we're the only species with a conscience, well, hell, man, that's a good thing, isn't it? Matt exhaled a sound of exasperation. Why does any of this matter? I'm getting a headache talking about it. Actually, so am I, CJ laughed. How do philosophers do it all day? Life is absurd, Matt. The more you try to figure it out, the less it makes sense. Ah, CJ, but it's an absurd comedy, my friend, not an absurd tragedy. Important difference. So why do I feel like crying? Hey, there's no greater inspiration for laughter than misery. CJ said, well, that sounds like something one of your characters would say in a play. Matt smiled. He already has. They drank their coffee in silence for a while. CJ said, I don't know. If it takes serial killers to get Chris Connor and Jerry Mulligan, I'm going to accept the trade. About 2 years ago, I got very curious about how my life experience and my inside-out writing experience corresponded. So I kind of told my life story, and at each event I quoted from the work of writing that sort of came out of that. And it was quite remarkable, actually. One reviewer called it an amazing look at a serious writer's process, which I think is inaccurate. I think it's an appalling look at a serious writer's process. And the reason I say that is because, when you do this for a long period of time, the line between life and work gets fuzzy. And I expressed this thought in a play when a character is having an argument with his wife. And he's an actor and she's an actress, and sometimes they play scenes together on stage. And this argument ends with him saying this: even now, as I hear myself talking, I wonder where I'll be putting this. In what future scene, in what future play, I'll be standing before someone like you, perhaps you yourself the actress, and I'll be the actor, and we'll be talking in some place someday, much as we are talking now, because that's what my life seems to be. My life is a dress rehearsal for a play, which, strictly speaking, doesn't really make my life much of a life at all, does it? This is the last short section of the memoir. I don't wish a serious writer's life on anyone. I agree with screenwriter Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, who said the only reason to be an artist is that you're incapable of being anything else. The meshing of the work and the life into a quilt of whole cloth is full of complications for every step of a normal life, from relationships to employment. In America, it's not clear what the purpose of literature is, other than to be swept into a marketplace driven by star worship and money worship. If literature mattered, if literature actually mattered, wouldn't Graham Greene's novel, The Quiet American, have made the Vietnam War impossible? Composer Philip Glass has suggested that all works of art should be anonymous in order to focus on the work and not the artist. When I began writing, I considered it an honorable profession, something like being a priest, revealing the truths of human experience. In this way, readers could learn from characters and stories and not have to learn by suffering themselves. I am much more cynical about such matters today. The meshing of life and work has no clear social benefit and adds much anxiety and stress to a life, making a normal life virtually impossible. All the same, these days I am hanging in like Gunga Din, as Jerry Lee Lewis liked to say. My life has been complicated, but also blessed. When you look at me, you might not know it, but you're looking at one of the lucky ones. I want to end with the ending of a play. This is a play I was commissioned to write. It's about the life of Moliere. It's not the kind of material I normally would come to, but I did get very involved in it. Now, at the end of the play, Moliere dies, and because he was an actor, a playwright, a theater person, he was not allowed a Christian burial. The church did not allow theater folk to have a Christian burial, which is really interesting since he was very popular. And the aristocracy was flooding to his plays. You know, they gave them Christian burials for seeing the plays, but they didn't give him a Christian burial for acting and writing the play. So he had to be put in a makeshift casket, and his friends carried him out of town to be left at the edge of a field where grave diggers would later bury him with the prostitutes and the lepers and the illegitimate children and all the other riffraff that the church did not approve of. So in the play, we have the casket on stage, a bare stage, the casket, and the lights are coming down slowly. It's the end of the play, and suddenly there's a spotlight that comes on the casket, and up out of the casket pops Moliere, and he speaks to the audience. Shed no tear. You rot in one grave as another. Well, if you don't believe that, don't ever have a mother. The luck that gets us all got me, though I'm better off than most, you must agree. Now consider this. Though I am dust, you're glad to pay right through the nose to see my plays. My plays live on until eternity, so why shed a tear for me? Oh, I know. In your age, the time is getting short. Everywhere there's war, famine, a great environmental wart. And yet, you insist your own age is unique. Oh, never has civilization reached such a peak. But I question this wisdom, found on TV, found in Forbes. Maybe that's presumptuous coming from a corpse. But still, I don't see our times as different, I confess, because in your age, as in mine, it's all a mess. Though you've reached the moon, you've discovered strange galactic gases. And 300 years later, the world is still full of asses. So, I hope I've moved you and given you a little fun. In truth, there's not a damn thing new beneath the sun. Thank you very much.